So joining me tonight is Linda Holt. So Linda works or doesn't work for, she writes for Think Scotland and she does some amazing pieces. So we're going to have her on to talk about the Scottish Tory leadership debate. So welcome to the stage,
Hi.
Linda Holt.
Thank you.
No worries. Thanks for coming on at such short notice. The leadership debate sort of, it's not really captured my attention as much as, anything else in the news. But generally, I seen Russell Finlay got off the mark rather quickly. Some were accusing him of getting off too quickly and not giving other people a chance. But I'm sure Murdo Fraser's going to throw his hat in the ring. I'm sure, was it Megan Gallagher's going to throw her hat in the ring? But let's talk about, is it all futile in the face of reform, Linda? What do you make of this whole leadership debate?
Well, I think Russell Finlay is the establishment candidate. I think it's who the powers that be in the Tory party and in Scotland, and I think in Westminster, he's the one they very clearly want. It is amazing how much he's been in the papers every single day, and virtually there have been articles by him or endorsing him. He's really queered the pitch, and other people have hinted that they want to stand, but they haven't come out publicly to do it. Partly that's because they haven't actually set a timetable yet at, the grandees, the management board of the Conservative Party in Scotland haven't set a timetable. But the pressure will be on, like anything in the background, for nobody to stand, just like nobody stood against Douglas Ross, because the last thing they want is an election, and they are terrified of Murdo Fraser standing, because he is a figure of real stature. And of course, he might also, they were very frightened that he could suggest that the Tory party should separate, the Tory party in Scotland should separate from the Conservative Party in the UK. And so I think Russell Finlay has been pushed incredibly. It's cheesed people off. There's been stuff in the papers that there's been negative briefing by his people against Megan Gallagher and Jamie Green. Murdo Fraser's come out against that, but basically the pressure is on for nobody else to stand and for Russell Finlay to be crowned. I think, if you're a Reform supporter, I think that's great. Russell Finlay is a continuity candidate. Nothing is going to change very much in the Conservatives, I don't think, if he becomes the leader. I was quietly hoping that Murdo Fraser would throw his hat in the ring. I'm not even sure that he will now, but he said publicly yesterday in the, what is it called, Hollywood Sources podcast, that he thinks he made a mistake in 2011, proposing a separate, it was a separate centre-right small c Conservative Party in Scotland, that the chance for that was really in the late 90s when Hollywood was being set up, and now it's too late. And so he made it very clear that he wouldn't be proposing that now. He, as I say, he may still stand, but the pressure will be on, not for him not to stand and for nobody else to stand as well. I think, Murdo Fraser's reasoning for that, I think is wrong. He said that whereas in 2011 he wanted to escape the toxic Tory label, now people he meets can distinguish between the Scottish Conservatives and the UK Conservatives, and they're happy to vote for the Scottish Conservatives when they wouldn't vote for the UK Conservatives. Well, I think that's just a load of rubbish, really.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Conservative vote in the general election in Scotland halved. They were very lucky to hang on to 5 out of their 6 seats, but their vote share halved. It was the worst result for them since 2011. Let me just check. Since 2011, their worst vote result. They are going downhill, and they are going to carry on going downhill. And Reform is going to come into the vacuum that they leave. And it will also be a vacuum that the SNP and Labour are leaving. Reform isn't just mopping up Brexit voters or ex-Tories who are fed up with the Tory party. They're going to be mopping up small c Conservative SNP people who are very disappointed with the SNP, and they're going to mop up Labour people who are fed up with Labour, and they will get more fed up in the next 2 years as Keir Starmer can't do all the things he promises. And those people would never vote for Conservatives in Scotland, because it is still a toxic brand. I was a councillor, and I then went independent, and for the last 2 years I haven't been a councillor, but I sometimes still say things on social media, local social media, Facebook, publicly, and I am always slagged off for being a Tory. It is incredible. You know, the hatred of Tories in this country. So I think there is a huge opportunity for reform here.
No, absolutely. I mean, just that you're so correct to sort of I don't know. I mean, it's just the Tory brand is, just as you describe, totally and utterly toxic here in Scotland. I mean, yourself, an ex-Tory councillor, I mean, you'll be lambasted on social media just for being associated with the Tories in any respect. And you know, you can't shake a stick online without somebody saying you're a Tory, or just, you know, the radioactivity of the Tory brand here in Scotland is, I mean, the Geiger counters are breaking here in Scotland in terms of toxicity. So why is it that, I mean, Murdo was absolutely correct to sort of break away from the wider party and become a Scottish only party? But I really do think they need a complete rebrand in order to succeed. But I just don't think they'll be able to do that. And like you suggest, reform is such a more palatable option for ex-Tory voters to go, because it's not got the baggage that the Tory party bring along. It's just as simply as, you know, it's a fresh slate for these, you know, these voters that are so disaffected, so disillusioned by the Tory party that they can just easily shift over to reform. I don't understand the. I mean, do you think we're going to see any defections from the Tory MSPs to reform? Do we think we're going to see the Tories try to become like almost like a mirror image of reform, or very similar, just to try to soak up or retain some of their voters that are perhaps going to leave towards reform?
I don't think the Tory party in Scotland will swing to the right, and well, you know, one of the problems about being a Scottish Conservative Party, where you've got your mothership party in Westminster, is at the moment there's a Westminster election, and no one knows who's going to win that. You know, who's going to become the leader of the Conservative Party overall? If it's going to be a sort of one nation Tory, sort of, you know, fairly liberal, I would call them Lib Dem lights, or if it's going to be someone more right wing. If it's someone more right wing, that is actually at odds with the tenor of the party in Scotland, which is became under Ruth Davidson very one nation Tory. I mean, they were Remainers basically. Most of them were Remainers. They were, you know, really on the liberal left with social stuff. And I think most of the Conservative MSPs are not first rate. They're pretty cowardly. You know, they do as they're told. I don't think that, and they won't be able to if, you know, we have I think they are constrained by whoever is elected in Westminster, and they don't even know who's going to be elected. Yeah. And I think whatever happens is they will try to be inoffensive. That's what they've been up to now. They've also been, you know, another reason people are cheesed off with the Tories in Scotland is that they've been useless.
Yeah, you can say that again.
Douglas Ross used to be quite nasty and fighty at First Minister's questions, but he wasn't really that effective, and he wasn't liked by his colleagues. You know, they were not effective. They did not put forward striking policies. Can you tell me one striking policy they put forward? Okay, they were the only party on the whole to oppose gender recognition reform. But, you know, they idiotically gave their members a free vote. So 3 of the Tory MSPs voted for it, which enabled the SNP and all the other feeble parties to say, oh, it had cross-party support. The whole of the parliament supported it. They didn't even have the guts to put down a whip for that. So you can't say, oh, well, that was a Tory party policy. They have been really wet. And I think, you know, part of that is because, you know, they were very comfortable being the opposition in Hollywood. You know, they all had their big salaries and expenses and offices and could swank around, and they weren't going to rock any boats. But they let people down. And you know, the reform coming in won't be hamstrung by having a party in England telling them what to do. Reform in Scotland will be completely free. And anyway, in England, they've got, they'll have radical policies, which Reform will also like. I read something the other day about Ronald Reagan saying about some election in the 80s that the Republicans had to stand on a platform which had sort of bold colours and was really simple with its message. And that's what Reform does. It doesn't shilly-shally around and say, well, maybe a bit of that and maybe a bit of that. And cliches about change and believing in the working man and all this stuff. There are clear policies with Reform. No to net zero is a scam. We don't believe in gender ideology. We stand up for the economy. We stand up for small businesses. We want to stop immigration or reduce immigration radically. They are clear policies that people want to see, and the Scottish Tories will not be able to do that.
No.
So I think they are a lost cause.
I tend to agree with you. I think they're doomed. I think their time is up. I think they're clutching at straws with this election contest, and they must be calling in all the favours they can get from all the journalists. Oh, please cover our election, our leadership election, because nobody actually cares about it. Nobody actually cares. Russell Finlay. I think you're right to he invoked Ronald Reagan with this big post he done. And he should be unapologetic, and it's farcical to me to think that they're toothless in every single respect. So why are we going to put our trust in the Tory party ever again? I think you're absolutely correct in your summation that they're doomed. They seem to be again, they're clutching at straws. This whole leadership contest to me is. It's futile.
It's a joke. Futile. The other problem that the Tory party have got, which I wrote about in my Think Scotland piece, which is the same problem that the SNP have got, which is that independence is over. There is no prospect of Indy Ref 2 for the next, 10, 20, 30 years. Yeah. No chance. Partly because the only vehicle for it is the SNP, and the SNP is imploding in slow motion in front of our eyes. The party is finished. They haven't got decent people to take over. They haven't let anybody in. Their structures are awful. They're still not recognising the extent of the problem. They're going to be slaughtered at the Hollywood election. And, the whole nationalist movement is split. And lots of people who used to vote SNP, they had their worst result ever at this general election. The statistics are just staggering. Let me just tell you, it was hang on. Unionist votes in this election were 64.7%, and SNP votes were 34.4%, which is the worst result since 2011. And only 19.7% of the total electorate voted for independence in this election, or independent supporting parties, whereas in 2014 it was 38%. They virtually halved the support for independence. And although there's lots of nationalists still floating around, and my husband's still, secret nationalist, he hates the SNP. Lots of them would not vote for an independence referendum now or in the next 5 years because they think the SNP cannot even run a tap, let alone a country. And that's the last thing we want to give them. So if independence is over for the SNP, it's also over for the Conservatives, because since sort of 2011, the Conservatives have fought every election on no to independence. And it's vote for us because we're not the SNP and we'll stop independence. They didn't have to have a positive policy platform. They don't have to fight for the votes, and they never have. They've got no background in terms of policy development. They've also, which again is a contrast to Reform, is they've got no grassroots.
Yeah, of course.
They completely, in Fife, I live in Fife, and the association, there were 2 Fife Conservative associations. One is completely closed and the other one is moribund. There's no, even when you saw them canvassing for the general election, it was all MSPs and paid staff. They don't have supporters. No. They don't have people on the ground. And that is also partly because I experienced it. They treated their grassroots so badly. They just saw them as cash cows and they didn't involve them. I was never involved as a councillor in any policy development. Now, Reform, because it's starting from scratch and it knows that it has to get supporters and workers and people to help. It's completely open. It's involving everyone in policy development. And, that's really refreshing.
Well,
I don't
again,
think Tories doing any of that.
no. They've made a living off being opposition here in Scotland, and the best thing for the Tories here in Scotland has been the SNP, quite frankly, because they've made a living off being the opposition to the SNP and say, "Oh, please vote for us because we're not the SNP, because we don't want independence." We fought elections, and they're always their message is, "We're not the SNP. Vote for us." To beat the SNP, it's actually staggering. They've got no vision for Scotland whatsoever. They've got no credible policies. Nobody can tell you what the Scottish Tory Party in Scotland actually represent, who they represent, because at this moment the only thing they do represent is themselves and their jobs, and this is the only thing that they're after. So this is where I'm thinking that surely the best chance of Tory MSPs at this point in time to retain their job is to defect to reform. The quicker, the better.
Well, I think people are in politics often have very closed minds. They live in little bubbles. It's like the SNP. I can't believe so many, senior people in the SNP haven't realised what a cataclysmic defeat the general election was and how their days are numbered. They just don't get it. I mean, I read Robin McAlpine today, who is, a big nationalist and really passionate about it. And he has been sort of publicly grieving for months. And he does the most insightful analyses about how hopeless they are. And then it doesn't sink into these people. They are in their little bubbles. And I think the Tories are in a bubble. I don't think they get how much Scottish politics has changed. Now that independence is off the agenda, it means that you can't hide behind that anymore. You can't coast on that as they have. And they have to come up with something different. And the Tories have been, and the SNP have been sort of mutually parasitic. I don't want to say symbiotic because that suggests something healthy, but they fed off each other and fed off, the hate of each other and fear mongering among people to get them to vote SNP or Tories according to who you hate. That's finished.
Yeah, and meanwhile in the background, they're all shaking hands and being all nicey, Linda.
Well, I'm not sure about defections. I think there are going to be defections from the UK Tory party, without a doubt, to reform. Okay. I think that's coming. But whether you'll have defections up here, I don't know. I think they will. What I'm also struck by is even though Reform got 7% of the vote in Scotland, they beat the Tories in every seat in Glasgow. They lost far fewer deposits than the Tories got. Hardly anyone's talking about them. In the podcast today that I listened to, Murdo Fraser and Liz Smith and Andy McIver and someone else didn't even mention reform. I think they think if they don't talk about it, they don't exist and they're not a danger. But they are going to get such a surprise. Yeah. So I don't think at this point they think that reform is, anything credible that we have to worry about. But that is so wrong. They need to read my article.
They know the writings on the wall, and the mere fact that they don't mention them, it's almost like the boogeyman. If we don't mention it, it doesn't exist. Whereas reform is the monster coming over the hill to swallow up all their vote share, to swallow up all their jobs. And I just don't see why they don't see it that way. And it's like you said, they live in this such an insulated bubble that they will just not. They'll not even put that out there. They won't even acknowledge the fact that this is happening. They won't acknowledge the fact that in reform is getting huge percentage right across the general election from a zero starting place, Linda.
Well, they did no campaigning in Scotland. There was no campaigning.
It's insane. It is actually insane how much votes reform got here in Scotland. Like you said, without campaigning. I've never seen any reform candidates. I didn't see any reform canvassers at all, and it was all based on the Farage effect. But again, he was connecting with people on such a visceral level. No trans ideology in the schools. We need to curb immigration immediately. We need to stop the boats. Immigration is swamping our country. It's crippling almost every single institution we've got, and yet nobody's want to talk about it. Nobody wants to face up to the facts. No one. And apart from Farage. And this is why they've had such an incredible rise, I believe. It's just, you know, and like you said, again, Labour are going to have their time in the sun. I think overall, why Rishi Sunak called for this general election really early is because the economy is in such tatters. It's in such disrepair. It's in such bad shape that no one actually wants to preside over an economy like this. No one. I mean, we're going through the cost of living crisis. I mean, it's the cost of lockdown crisis, but we're going through it. And I mean, nobody wants. It's like it's a pass the parcel situation where the parcel's a bomb. Nobody wants to hold on to this economy now, and nobody wants to address it. Whereas I think at least if Farage and Reform were to take it, at least they can connect to voters on a what am I trying to say here? They can connect to voters on the street, basically. They can connect to the people on the street and the people in the pubs and the people online way quicker, way more, easily than the Tories can.
I agree. I totally agree.
So where does, I mean, do you think Russell Finlay is going to take this? Do you think it's just going to be a coronation? Like no one's...
Yes, I think it's going to be. I think it's very likely to be a coronation. And I think the pressure on the people who are thinking of standing not to stand is enormous. So I think it is likely to be a coronation, yes. And even if there's an election, the only candidate who would stand a chance of winning against him would be Murdo Fraser. Megan Gallagher and Jamie Green, I don't think most of the Tory members who would get a vote are old and very conservative, and they're not going to like those two. And Megan Gallagher has not, I don't really understand why she is such a, she's deemed to be, such a front runner. If you listen to her perform in Hollywood, I mean, she can barely read out a speech.
Yeah, I know.
So she's embarrassing. Jamie Green is, far too...
Ultra embarrassing.
Yeah, and it's chalk and cheese, but for him, I mean, and, the older Conservative Association members, I mean, I know it was sort of written off as a sort of nasty briefing against him, but, his own association wants to deselect him. What's going on there? So I think the only person of stature who could challenge Russell is Murdo, but I don't know if he'll stand. But I don't know if he'd win. But I think he'd be better than Russell. But I think the Conservative Party is still massively hamstrung. I don't think they will have the radical policies they need. I don't think they will be able to compete with Reform. And as I said before, Reform is also going to suck in voters who are ex-Labour voters and ex-SNP voters who would never vote Tory. Reform has got this wide constituency. And the idea, which people keep on saying, oh, well, Scotland is, the Scottish exceptionalism. Scotland is different. We're more liberal. We don't have a problem with immigration. We're not racist. That's a load of rubbish. Yeah. You can invite me onto another programme because I run a taxi firm in St Andrews, which has been, we've got a large number of foreign drivers who've come in. And the reaction of the taxi drivers that I employ, who are, not intellectuals or anything, not politically very interested, but they, a number of them voted Reform because they're so fed up about seeing what's happening on the taxi rank. And that's
very interesting.
Other bits of Scotland where people do see immigrants coming in, they're not assimilating, they're not behaving according, they're not adapting to our culture and our practices. And people just see Reform as the alternative.
Yeah.
And in fact, in any when I was a councillor and housing is a terrible thing. It's incredibly difficult to get a council house in Scotland, and foreigners who come in, immigrants, especially if they have large families, jump the queue, and that causes a great deal of distress. And you see totally racist comments coming out on Facebook, in social media about this. Scotland is no different about immigration to England. I mean, we don't have such severe problems yet, but the way people are going to feel about it in Scotland is exactly the same as the way people feel about it in England.
You're absolutely correct. I mean, just to recap, the Tory brand is so very toxic that it feels like the only course of direction that the Tory party has in Scotland is down. The leadership, again, Russell Finlay, I agree with you that Murdo Fraser is probably the better candidate, but it doesn't matter who they put in place, their direction of travel is still down. It feels so futile that they're even going through this rigmarole of changing the leadership. It's such a waste of time. And Douglas Ross, again, it was such a wet rag. He done nothing. Your comments there, I mean, why aren't the people in the Tory party saying things like this? If they did, they would have stood a chance. But their time in the sun has unfortunately come and went. Well, it's been such an amazing interview with you, Linda, and it's very insightful coming from an ex-Tory councillor. And it's just, I just feel that it's even funny that it's newsworthy, at this point. It really is.
Well, the SNP aren't doing anything, are they? They've just stuck their heads in the sand.
Yeah.
So there's no news coming from the SNP, and Hollywood's closed, so there's nothing to say. That's why the papers are doing it. Anyway, you'll have to invite me back.
Yes, I will.
Holt is out, and as the Tories trundle on, and we can talk about their new policies. But I'll also let you know how Reform is doing. Reform is there are a number of by-elections coming up, and Reform is going to fight every by-election really hard. Mm-hmm. So they are galvanising. Yeah.
I feel like the motivation and the behind Reform at the moment is just so huge. There is no motivation in the Tory party. There's no motivation in the SNP. They're all demoralised. Whereas there seems to be actually, something to vote for in Reform. People are actually wanting to race out of the house and vote for a party after all this time. After all this time of just being the lesser of two evils, if nobody to vote for. We've seen it happen in the general election with the majority. The majority saying, stand down, Reform candidates, please stand down. We can't afford to have Reform sneak in and take votes away from Tories that would, enable the SNP to come in. Even though that happened in maybe 2 or 3 instances, nobody actually cared. Nobody cared. And the fact, you could have told people straight away that if you voted Reform, it's going to enable an SNP voter. They still would have voted Reform. They still would have said, you know what, I, in good conscience, can't vote for them. Yeah. It's just staggering that people are willing to put their neck out there and vote for Reform no matter what. Again, it's such a pleasure to have you on that. Right. You have yourself a great evening. And once again, thanks for coming on. And we'll have you on again, okay?
All right. Thank you, Niall.
No worries.